of his background, how he got interested in motion pictures, some of the projects he's working on now, or interested in doing now. And then he will leave a good 15-20 minutes at the end if there are additional questions related to what he relates to us, or if you've got a burning question you're afraid is going to be asked tonight or something along those lines. So, Paul Verhoeven.
Thank you very much. I thought instead of going into all kinds of technical details about special effects or editing or whatever, that was probably more interesting to give a little bit more, give you a little bit more idea about my background, why I came to the United States, and why I changed from mathematics to filmmaking. Also, there has been a lot of discussion in the newspapers lately when Total Recall was released about violence in the movies, especially my violence in my movies. And probably I should address that a little bit, give you some idea of why I think, but this is just a theory of course, why I think that my movies are violent. And to start with the last thing, I was born in 38 in Amsterdam, and as you know, the Germans occupied Holland in 40. So when I was a child of 3 till 7, 8, till 45, I was living in occupied country. And although the first couple of years of the German occupation were pretty mild, the last couple of years were very violent. And I was living in The Hague, which was the center of the German government. Also, which was more important, the launching pads of the rockets, the V1s and the V2s that were invented by Werner von Braun, who later was head of the NASA program here. But he invented these wonderful rockets that were made in Peenemünde in Germany, then sent over to The Hague, and the launching pads were about 1 mile from our house. So these rockets were always sent to London. And because of that, the English and the Americans were continuously bombing the area. So that was in fact the area around our house, because they wanted to get rid of these rockets and mostly of these launching pads to prevent the rocket to go to London. And so when I was living there, especially the last couple of years, when in 44 I think they started to send these rockets around, it was an extremely violent situation because of all the bombs that were falling down. And as a child, I think I saw so much violence there. I mean, I saw so many dead bodies that there was a lot of blood, and strangely also the whole area around our house was completely bombed out, because the English squadron leader at a certain moment reversed the map in his cockpit, and so they bombed the wrong area, which was a civilian area, and whatever 20-30,000 people were killed. And that was just, let's say, 100 yards from my house. The whole area beyond, at the back of the house, was completely destroyed. And so that part of The Hague was completely in flames. And I think it's very astonishing when you are a child and your perception of the daily routine is dead people, violence, bombing, fire, day in, day out. I think that gives you a very strong impression, which probably sinks into the subconscious later, when it's all over and when war is over and peace starts. For me it was like, to be honest, I think war was a great time. I mean, I was a child and I loved it. I mean, it was like, I don't know if you ever seen a movie by John Gorman, Hope and Glory. It's exactly like that, but worse. I mean, that was kind of mild because there was not that much happening in London. I mean, there was bombing, but not like in The Hague, which was absolutely extremely violent. But for a child, it was kind of fun. I mean, It's amazing to say so, but that's what I felt. It was like every day was a big adventure. Now, of course, if your brothers, sisters, or parents are killed, it's a different situation. But in my family, nobody was killed. And so as a child, you don't look much further around. You're not aware of hundreds of thousands of Jewish people that are sent away and never come back. You realize that all after the war. But during the war, I never realized that. For me, it was like the most fantastic special effects that you could ever see. Every night when you would look up at that sky, you would see burning planes coming down. And the next day my father would bring me, would walk for, let's say, half a mile, and we would look at the bomb, at the plane that came down. I remember, for example, that the Germans were picking up pieces of meat, which was the English pilot, and they would put them in a little box. And these things are so strange, in fact, but so normal for me at that time, that I think a lot of the violence in my movies, my feeling that violence is normal and that peace is anormal, that war is the natural state and that peace is an unnatural state, which of course is not true. But, and of course I'm not making propaganda for war, the contrary. I mean, when you get older, when you have your own kids, I mean, it's the worst thing that can happen to you. But there's two things, which is your consciousness, which when you learn in an intellectual way what is bad and good and moral, not moral, and what happened to you when you were a child, and you were completely open to everything, and you accepted it as it was. And I think that's basically why my defense system against violence is very limited. When I get a violent scene in a movie, all these images of the war or similar images come to my mind, and I portray them as I saw them when I was a child, without any moral standards probably, because as a child you don't have them. You just look, you see, you think, oh, this is it. Well, you see a hand here and a leg there. And I think images like in Soldier of Ordnance where they're walking in a military complex and they see a part of a leg on the ground. That's basically based on these images that I saw when this English pilot was gathered together. And so that's, I think, what I feel is the background of the ultimate violence that is in my movies. Now, it's a wonderful theory, and it's certainly what I'm telling you is true. I don't know if it's the ultimate truth or that I'm basically so bad that I like violence in the first place. That I don't know. Of course, I have a little bit the feeling that to a certain degree violence is anyhow a very human situation, and that part of our brains, I would even say part of our genetic structure, part of our DNA chain, is probably, as it is genetically related to sharks and to 7 to 8 apes, is probably violent in the first place. And so there might be two things, which is my personal experience and something else, which we always, I think, try to deny, and we always are pointing out that violence and evil is in our neighbors and not in ourselves, but basically I feel it's in ourselves probably more than in our neighbors. So anyhow, so that's about violence. And the other thing I want to talk about was how I made my transition, first from mathematics to film, and then from Europe to Holland. Now, after the war, we were, of course, liberated by the Americans, the Canadians, and the English. And the only films that were available and the only entertainment that you could get were American movies. So when I was a child of 7, 8, 9, I saw a lot of American movies, and these were probably not what you would call A movies, these were probably B movies. So a lot of westerns and action, science fiction, and as a child I thought that was great. And I think when I got older, I wanted to be a film director very vaguely. I wanted to be that. And I tried to get in the Institute for Cinematographic Studies in Paris, but unfortunately I was a month too late, so that didn't work out. And then my father told me that I was foolish anyhow to pursue a career in filmmaking because there was no film industry in Holland in the first place. I think at that time, which is the 50s, 60s, they made 1 or 2 movies a year, which was not extremely promising for a career. And so he said, you're much better off to go to university. And as I was pretty good in mathematics, I just took mathematics because I thought it was interesting and elegant and that I could do it. So for 6, 7 years I studied mathematics, but I always felt that emotionally I was kind of bored. I mean, I think mathematics, if you are, it's really an aesthetic situation, mathematics, and it challenges your intelligence and even your creativity. Emotionally, it's difficult, of course. There is not much emotion around. And also, I felt that although I could do all my exams, I would never be really creative in mathematics. I felt that my brains were not really prepared to do any, to invent any new interesting theories or theoremas or whatever, that I would not be able to do that my creativity stopped after my exam. After performing well for a professor, that was more or less the end what I could do, I felt. And so during my study, I started as a hobby to do filmmaking, and then I got very lucky. After getting my doctorate, I was drafted for the military, and they wanted to send me to the Air Force, the rocket bases in Germany. And I applied. I talked to the government, to the state secretarial office, and asked to be allowed to get into the film department of the Navy. And for some reason that was possible. And so for 2 years I was making documentaries about the Marines, and pretty violent in fact. And but when I came out, this was for 2 years, yeah, because I was drafted. And after this, when I came out, I decided not to pursue any mathematics anymore, but to try to make a career in filmmaking. And so I did. Based on the work that I had done for the Navy, it was not difficult to get a job in television. And from television, at the end of the 60s, in the beginning of the 70s, I moved over to feature filmmaking in the beginning of the 70s. Which, at that time, between 70 and 80, with a lot of subsidy of the government, was not so difficult. The movies that I made together with the same producer, Rob Howard, and the same scriptwriter, Gerard Soterman, and for whoever has seen Soldier of Orange or The Fourth Man, you can see that these are the same people that are throughout all my movies. It was a group of 3 people who always worked together for about 12, 13 years, and we made 7 movies together, which were all, for Dutch standards, extremely successful. And in fact, there was no reason at all to leave Holland till the beginning of the 80s. I mean, after I did a movie in 73, 74, which was called Dirty Delight, and which got an Oscar nomination here in Los Angeles, I was invited several times to come to the United States, especially after the movie I did, Soldier of Orange. I got a lot of calls, even from Spielberg, who said, I saw your movie, what are you doing in Holland? Come over to the United States because it's much better here. And I doubted that, in fact. I thought, well, I'm very happy in my country, why should I leave Holland? And there's no, I mean, I can make the movies that I want to make, and I'm happy in doing so. There is a lot of talent there, especially really good actors and actresses. And it was only in the beginning of the 80s that it started to change. Now there's something very strange happened in Holland. When I was working in the 70s, I mean, you have to understand the system in Holland. Films are made for 50–60% with government subsidy. There are only 14 million Dutch people, and to make a film successful, to recuperate the money that you put into the movie, there's this kind of language barrier, of course, that limits your audience pretty much to these 14 million people in Holland and a couple of million in Belgium that also speak Dutch. and perhaps some people in South Africa, but that's very limited. And altogether, the movies are so expensive that if you don't have this government money, it's impossible to make a movie. Now, in fact, this nowadays applies to the whole European community. All European movies are made with government subsidy, as you know, or probably don't know, because otherwise the European film industry by now would be completely dead. Now, it's already pretty dead, but there's still something going on. But without that money, it wouldn't work anymore. And so the situation you have to face is to get that money. Of course, you have to submit your script to a committee. And in the 70s, this was a committee that was kind of right-wing, I would even say. But being a right-wing, it was extremely liberal. It accepted everything, more or less. If you did a good job, if you worked hard, if your movies were more or less successful, you got the money for the next movie. You could go on. And at the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s, what happened is that this committee became switched politically, I would say, to the left. And strangely enough, or perhaps not strange, this, say, left-wing committee, like with a lot of left-wing organizations, was extremely, I would say, dictatorial, or another word would be probably be close to fascistic. That means that they only accept, dogmatic probably is a better word, not so mean, but dogmatic in a way that they wanted movies to be relevant. Now, if it was just entertainment, then it was not enough. It had to be politically or sociologically or culturally relevant. And in the eyes of the committee, the pictures that I had made in the 70s were not relevant. They were considered as being decadent and amoral. And they also thought that my pictures, especially a picture I made in 80, which was Petters, was not representing Dutch society in a good way. I mean, it was cynic, negative, and downbeat. And they felt that I should not get any money anymore. And so in the beginning of the 80s, it got very difficult to finance my movies. The last one that I got financed after a lot of rejections was The Fourth Man, which was also, of course, considered as extremely decadent because of the homosexual items that are in the movie. And that was the moment that I started to think that probably I should not stay longer in Holland. And when in 85, in the fall of 85, I got a script from the American studio Orion called Robocop, which I didn't like in the first place. I thought it was a silly American movie. And I thought that the movies I had done in Holland were a much higher level. But my wife read it and she said, you should reconsider this because I think you can do a nice job with it, and you anyhow want to get out of Holland, so why not take this and get out? And so she convinced me to take the project, Robocop, and in the fall of 85 I came over to the United States, and in 86 made Robocop, and then after that Total Recall. Deliberately, I think these two movies are pretty far away from the work I did in Holland. And I can tell you, I mean, they are action-oriented, they're very much science fiction, there is not that much dialogue, and it's probably less personal. What I set out to do when I came to the United States was, first of all, realizing that so many European directors had failed in the United States, that they had tried for 1 or 2 years doing personal movies in the United States, and then of course there was no success and they had to go back. And I felt that it would take me about 5-6 years to learn about the United States, to learn the language better, to learn the cultural situation, and find out what American audiences are like. Not only what they prefer, but what their perception of movies really is. And so I set out to do 2 movies, Robocop and Total Recall, that would not have too much dialogue, in fact. I just tried to avoid every script that was based on dialogue, because I felt that, well, you can hear it, I mean, it's not, certainly, it's not my favorite thing, dialogue. It cannot be your favorite thing when you go to a country where you know the language only partially. And so I avoided that and concentrated on films that had a strong visual impact. And because I always was interested in science fiction and special effects, I thought, with my background in mathematics and physics, I thought it was interesting to learn how to do special effect movies. And so that's what I did the last 5 years. And it's only now, after, in 1991, that I'm slowly starting out to go in different directions and trying to make movies that are more based on normal things than on special effects. In fact, the next movie that I'm going to do is called Basic Instinct, which is I would say, an erotic thriller with Michael Douglas, and is much more based on dialogue than anything I've ever done here before. As you know, I'm also preparing a movie about Jesus the Man, called Jesus the Man, which is about the last couple of years of the life of Jesus. And I'm preparing another movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, which is situated in the time of the Crusades. So these are the 3 projects that I'm working on. And the film that I just mentioned in the beginning, Basic Instinct, will be shot in March in San Francisco and will probably be released in about a year. So I think that's more or less how my career from Holland to the United States developed. And I think we're probably more or less halfway. Perhaps I should just stop a moment and find out if there are some questions, or if people want to hear more about certain items, like what I want to do with Jesus or one of the other projects. So I've just stopped for a moment, and if somebody has a question, I'll answer it. You go ahead.
You were just saying something about Jesus the Man. I noticed a lot of the precursor stuff that you said, you made a lot of reference to violence and stuff. Why all of a sudden are you making, have you made the total opposite switch into something as controversial as both religion in the United States?
Well, I mean, this picture about Jesus I want to do for a long time, and of course you have to realize that the situation in the first century in Israel was extremely violent in the first place. I mean, so it's not a movie about peace, isn't it? And crucifixion was done probably every day or every second week or something like that. People were crucified by the thousands by the Roman governors. And Jesus' life was anyhow in constant danger. If you read the Gospel, you see that he's trying to get out, or he has to get out every time again, because people are trying to stone him, and they want to throw him from the hills. I mean, there is an element of constant danger in the first place. His foregoer, the forerunner, John the Baptist, of course, was killed by Herod Antipas because he thought that John was preaching counter-insurrection. And I think that you cannot see Jesus without seeing the political issues that are there. In fact, I think the crucifixion, Jesus was crucified. Now, the people that were crucified, Jewish people that were crucified, were mostly insurrectionists. In fact, the charge that Jesus had to face was insurrection. Being on the title is on the cross, it said the accusation is King of the Jews, meaning a political issue, which means like having political power. And I think the situation of Jesus and his way of dying indicate that at least in the eyes of the Romans, Jesus was a guerrilla fighter. I mean, if that's true, of course I don't believe that he was a guerrilla fighter, but he was close enough to that for the Romans to perceive him like that. So I think the film about Christ will certainly be kind of violent. I mean, it's not like Total Recall. But it will be much closer to the Soldier of Orange or something like that. Of course, it's about characters, it's about people, and violence will be there, but not like in Total Recall where violence, because it's Arnold Schwarzenegger, where violence is well, I mean, when you make a movie like that, like Total Recall, you know beforehand that you are making an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. So you know that spending $60 million, you know that the people that are financing the movie expect at least that the people that like Arnold come to see the movie. And otherwise you shouldn't do it. If you're not willing to accept that, you shouldn't do a movie like that. So if I sign a contract for Total Recall, I know that it is an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie and that every 5 or 10 minutes you need some violent action because everybody is dissatisfied. Now, I think if you make a movie about Jesus, people are not waiting for violence or action every 5 minutes. So, but I think you have to realize that even when Jesus was arrested, that his disciples had swords. I mean, one of them was even hitting the ear of the servant of the high priest. And Jesus in the Gospel of Luke says to his disciples in the last couple of months, whatever I told you before, now if you have some money, or if you don't have money, sell whatever you have and buy a sword. So, I mean, he was pretty much realizing that he was in danger. And of course, as he was in my vision, for probably half a year or something like that, a disciple of John the Baptist, Jesus has a very high opinion of John the Baptist throughout the Gospels. And he knew that his master, or his former master, was killed. So he would know that he was facing the same thing. Go ahead.
You say you're going to branch out in other avenues. Do you believe in doing sequels, like say a sequel to Total Recall? I know you did for World Cup too. Do you not believe in sequels?
Well, generally, it's very difficult to improve on a sequel. I think the best sequels are probably done by Lucas and Spielberg. And as you know, Spielberg, for example, is clever enough not to do one sequel after the other. When he did Indiana Jones 1, he did other movies in between, and then did Indiana Jones 2. And when they asked me to do RoboCop 2, that was immediately after RoboCop 1. So it was like going from one movie and I think that's killing all your creativity. I don't think these movies are anyhow so difficult and you're so exhausted that after doing a movie like that, with all these special effects and the action, that I think it's really bad to do one after the other. And so although I considered doing it, I rejected it because I felt that it would be kind of boring for me. So I think when you set out to do like in Star Wars, where you have a plan for 6, 7 or even 9 movies in it, it's a sequel of 9, it's supposed to be Star Wars. Then probably when you set out to do number 4, which is the first one, Lucas at least had a plan for the other ones. So I think, but what they are normally doing, a film is a success. Everybody's amazed. So, oh, it's a big success, let's make a sequel. It's like they're doing now a film about babies that was talking now too, and but they didn't consider a sequel from the beginning. They just made the movie and saw it was successful. But then these sequels are mostly silly, I think, because they are never based on a concept. They're based on like, it's like selling cookies, yeah. And the cookies go very well, and everybody likes these cookies. So why shouldn't you go on for the next 10 years to sell these cookies? Economically, it makes sense, but artistically or from a creative point of view, it doesn't make any sense at all. So basically, I would say, no, I wouldn't do any sequels, and I've never done so. And I rejected RoboCop 2, and the plans for Total Recall 2 that are vaguely there, I would certainly not follow up on. Unless I'm in big problems from it. Sometimes it's a good way to resurrect your career. Yeah, go ahead.
As a writer, how does your background in mathematics and physics help you in physics exams?
Well, not really very much. I think every university study prepares you very well for anything in life. But I mean, being a taxi driver in New York would prepare you also very well for a career as a director. Probably even better, yeah, because you would know more about life. I think what the university study does is preparing your brains. It's programming your brains. It's like a computer in your brains. It's programmed to analyze problems and to solve them. And if you do mathematics or psychology or whatever, I think that's basically always the same. And I think the only advantage that I have of mathematics, or physics probably, because I did mathematics physics, is that when I was doing special effects, that I could understand what a mirror image was or something like that. Yeah, that I could understand things. I didn't have to go back to my books. So it went a bit faster. But I think that everybody that every film director without any mathematical knowledge can be an expert in visual effects if he takes the time. And in fact, Spielberg or Lucas don't have a degree in mathematics at all. And they're probably the best in special effects that I've ever seen, better than I am. And they're even more inventive there than I am. I think what I did in Total Recall was not so much going into new ways. I think Lucas, when he did Star Wars, invented a lot of things that were new. I mean, especially this computer, the cameras that are moved by a computer. I mean, what you normally have in special effects, that the scene is shot several times. I mean, it's one shot for the background, it's one shot for the foreground, and for the middle ground, then the star fields have to be brought in, and some other spaceship have to be brought in, and they do that in what they call several passes. So every time you shoot only one element. But what Lucas invented, in fact, that is the big invention, that they did that of course before in a lot of movies, but they never did it with a moving camera. So if you look at Lucas films, you see when the starships are going to frame and things are happening, you always see the camera moving. So the camera moves always like this, and then the ships come in from the side, and the camera moves to the side, and it moves all along. Yeah. So there's this definite camera movement. And to do that, if you have several passes, that means, of course, that the camera has to do that movement exactly the same every time. And I think the big invention that Lucas brought to filmmaking is that he found, or he established that computer system that is regulating the camera move. So the camera move is registered. There's a registration of the camera move by the computer, and then if that's in the computer, then you punch the button, and then the computer repeats the movement always the same. And that's, I think, something that's probably the big change in special effect movies, or the only big change in special effect movies in the last 20 years. And I think I have not used anything new like that in Total Recall. Total Recall is really using all the techniques that were available that were invented by Spielberg and Lucas and other people, and using them probably in extremis, but it's still the same elements. So I don't know, my mathematics seems to be lost. Go ahead.
Going back to the new movie on Christ the Man, what is your goal in making this movie? Is it just to present Christ as a historical figure, or is it to give people a new viewpoint on him?
Yes, that's. I think I have the feeling. I mean, I'm not baptized, and I'm nothing in fact. But when I started to be interested in Jesus when I was 20 or something like that, and I felt when I was studying it, because it intrigued me. First of all, it's a very courageous man. Yeah, so there's no doubt about that. As a hero, it's pretty good, I think. There are other heroes, but he's also a good one. So from a normal human point of view, it's worth studying. But then I felt that in the last 20 centuries, from the beginning till now, so from the year that he died, which is around 30, till now, I thought there were brought in by the churches, so many layers of, to use a strong word, nonsense, that I felt that it would be important to peel off all these layers and try to go back to original and say what exactly happened, what did he really want, what did he really say. And as you know, or perhaps not know, I'm a member of the Jesus Seminar, where they are really working on this, getting the New Testament in 4 colors, yeah? I don't know if you know about it, but the Jesus Seminar, which is gathering every half year, and has most of the important theological scholars of the United States are coming there. What they are trying to do, what they will do ultimately, is present the 4 Gospels in 4 colors. Red being authentic, pink being kind of authentic, gray being possible but not so probable, and black being nonsense. Nothing, didn't happen. Happened later, added by the church, added by this, added by that. Now these 4 Gospels will be pretty black in their redaction. I mean, there will be only probably 20–30% will be red and pink. And what I'm trying to do is to make a film that will be based mostly on this 25%, of this 25% red, so that it would really go back to what originally might have happened. Taking away, of course, things like the virgin birth. I mean, Mary being a virgin and being, how do you call that? Getting a child from God, yeah? And which is, of course, mythology. Well, I say, of course, for me it's, of course, mythology. For a lot of people it might feel differently. But, I mean, that won't mean that I'm going to say anything about yes or not Mary being a virgin. I mean, that's not the issue. What I would do, just to give an example, is to show, in the first scene or in the first couple of scenes of the movie, I would show Jesus with his brothers and sisters and his mother. Probably his mother was dead by then, because there's not much mention of Joseph in the Gospels anyhow, and he seems not to play any important part, so probably he was dead or divorced or whatever. But in the Gospel of Mark and Matthew, the names of his brothers are all mentioned, and so there are 4 brothers and a couple of sisters. So to see a Jewish family with the mother there and 4 brothers and a couple of sisters sitting around the table and discussing the issues of the day, probably also political issues, that would be the setup to counter the idea that Mary was a virgin. I mean, she can still be a virgin with Jesus, but if I make him make him the oldest brother, then of course she wouldn't be a virgin anyhow. So I mean, that's basically what I want to do, which is not provoking because I want to provoke. It's provoking because I think a lot of people, especially in Catholic people, are not aware of the fact that Jesus had 4 brothers. And seeing Jesus with his brothers sitting around, I think is kind of, wow, I didn't know that was happening. I mean, I think a lot of people, I don't know how many people here didn't know that he had 4 brothers. Some. Good. Yeah, but not Catholic probably. I asked this question on last couple of months ago. I was in Spain when I was doing the promotion on Total Recall, and I asked during the interview, just to figure it out, I asked all the people that interviewed me if they knew about Jesus' brothers. And this is a Catholic country. None of them knew. I had to pick up the New Testament that was in my room, because you get it in your room always. I brought it down. And I pointed it out and said, what about, it was also in Spanish, yeah? So I said, okay, read this chapter. And they were like, what? They couldn't believe it, really. So, I mean, especially in the Catholic Church, there is a strong resistance, of course, to accept that Jesus had 4 brothers. Now, this is a minor item, I would say. But, I mean, that's basically how I would do the movie. But, like things that I said before, emphasizing that he was killed by the Romans as a political insurrectionist, emphasizing that when he was arrested there was a real fight with swords. These kind of things would all be in the movie, yeah. Go ahead, sir.
In Total Recall, you used Dream Quest for the effects instead of usual Lucasfilm. We see in most films. What was the reason behind that?
Money.
Cheaper?
Yes. And well, that's what he said. I mean, you go. I mean, what you normally do, you go. There are 4 or 5 of these kind of factories, or whatever you want to call them. I don't know what the word for it is. The factory.
Production house.
Production houses, right? That do these special effects. There are 3 or 4 in Los Angeles, and there is a big one in San Francisco, which is the Lucas one. And so you give them the script, and then you ask them what their budget is on the special effects. And apparently, the ILM budget was a couple of $100,000 more expensive than the Dream Quest one, and that's why the producers decided to go for Dream Quest. Now, ultimately, of course, the budget was supposed to be for the special effects was supposed to be $4.2 million, and the Dream Quest budget was 4.2, and the ILM budget was 4.5. I wanted to go to ILM. I pushed everybody to do that, but I was overruled. And the producers decided to go to Dream Quest. Now, the ultimate budget of Dream Quest, when the film was finished, what we had to pay, was $8 million. So, I thought it was not the greatest decision in the world to go to. I would have preferred to go to ILM because I think they are the best. They have the best people, most experienced, and also when I got there, I felt very well supported by them. Not that the results of Dream Quest were bad, the results were great, but the money was also very, it was very expensive. Yeah. Sure, yeah.
Being a major motion picture producer or director, what advice would you give to someone who was interested in
You mean to be part of the industry? To go to Los Angeles. Another way is, of course, but I don't know if that exists. I started out, I don't know if they have that in the United States, but in Holland, there is a program for young filmmakers that is a government program, which means that you get money for movies of 20-30 minutes. And so you can just apply for that, and the government gives you the money. Now, if you make a movie of 20-30 minutes, and the movie is good, then you would be in a wonderful position, because then you can show producers what you did, and so you could do a longer film. Now, I don't think that this exists so much in the United States, and I feel that probably the best way to achieve something in film would really be to go to Los Angeles, because you can start anywhere. And a lot of people started nowhere, and then it will take you a couple of years to get somewhere. But there are, if you have talent mostly if you work hard, because to be honest, I don't think that I'm extremely talented in comparison to movie makers like Kurosawa or something like that. But I think I work very hard, and I've always worked very hard. So I think working hard is probably the strongest basis for success. So if you do that wherever, and especially in Los Angeles, I think you'll get wherever you want to be. And you'll find out probably, because there's so much diversity, you probably can find a place where you really want to be.
You start out by imagining then with a motion picture. I just wonder if you had any other interest in movies that you might go into motion picture.
And theology. I think that's basically it. Sometimes I'm reading about astronomy, but that's mostly for my pleasure. And of course I'm a music fan, but that's not something I want to do. I'm not really good enough in music to be creative there. It's like with mathematics, I like it, but I cannot do it. For the moment, I would have liked to be a painter, but I think it's too difficult to do two professions in one life. So probably in a couple of 100,000 years when we get to when we become 150 or something like that, then probably you can go for professions. But at the moment, I think it's still too difficult.
So, yeah, no, being a director and a doctorate, holding a doctorate, it's kind of unusual. Besides you and Bill Cosby, do you know of any other directors or actors in the U.S. who have hold doctorates?
No. I don't know. I didn't even know that he did that.
Yes.
No, I didn't know that. But I wouldn't know. I know that Kubrick has, I think, master degrees in mathematics. That's the only one that I know. I know that Eisenstein and Dovkin had some degrees in chemistry and mathematics. But that's all I know, really. Yes?
In Holland, you said that your movies were better than growing up they weren't growing up to the power of moving like a man.
I cannot hear it. Can somebody repeat it?
In Holland, you said that your movies were of a different caliber. What would you say the difference between the movies made in Holland and the movies in Robocop?
Oh, right. Well, I think that I feel that the movies in Holland were much more normal and closer to real life. Basically, that's what I feel. I think Total Recall and Robocop have nothing to do with real life. It's all fantasy. And I think Soldier of Orange, a lot of the movies I did anyhow were based on biographical work. Soldier of Orange is an autobiography. And even Force Man is partly, I think, for 80% based on real life. And I think what I'm doing in the United States is all kind of fantasy. Now, I think getting your inspiration from real life feels to me more interesting and more important than fantasy. So I would like and I would prefer to go back to reality. I mean, all the work that I did in Holland is based on reality, and everything I did in the United States is based on fantasy, more or less. So I think that's a big difference. But for me, reality feels more important. So I mean, the movies, like a movie like Christ the Man, is certainly not fantasy. That's really trying to be realistic.
Maybe we should make that the last question because we're kind of running out of time.
Okay.
I was just wondering, straight from the top, Total Recall, real or true?
Both. I mean, to be honest, that's what I wanted. I mean, I made the movie in a way that it would be true on both levels, and I spent a lot of time to get that. I mean, if you want a scientific explanation, you might know, of course, in quantum mechanics, there's a very interesting principle, which is called the principle of uncertainty. How you know say it in English? Uncertainty problem, or uncertainty of not being uncertain. Yeah, which is the principle of Heisenberg, which means, for example, if you have a moving object, that you can, if you try to measure the place of the object and the velocity of the object at the same time, the more precisely you measure the velocity, the less precise the place gets. And so that's that principle. And that means, of course, that there are different realities possible at the same moment. And what I wanted to do in Total Recall is to do a movie where both levels were true. So that there is a dream level, which starts when he gets into his chair and he put the thing in his neck. And that would go throughout the whole movie, because the next scene where they say, oh, there's a problem, there's a big there's a glitch here, that would already be the dream, of course. That's where the dream starts. Yeah? The next scene, when they are running into his room and he's fighting and stuff, that would be part of his dream, convincing him, because there is a glitch, convincing him that it is real because there is a glitch, but it would be part of the program. They would build into the program to make him accept the fact that it's real, that it's a dream. And if you look to the movie, if you ever see the movie for the second time, then you'll see that the whole program that's set up in the beginning, when Dr. McMahon goes into the recall office, and he talks to this guy that sells him the program on Mars, that he gets everything in the movie, he will get everything what he wants. He gets the trip to Mars, he gets the girl, the exotic girl, he kills the bad guys, and he saves the entire planet. what he does. And that's basically the dream. Even halfway in the movie, as you might remember, this other guy comes in, this Dr. Edgemar, and tells him that he is in a dream. And then Arnold says, well, if it is that he's still in the recall chair. And then Arnold says, well, if I'm there, I can kill you. So he puts the gun on his hand, and the guy says, sure, no problem for me, big problem for you, because you will be psychotic from now on. Because when the walls of reality will fall apart, you will be one moment you will be the savior of the rebel cause. Next moment you will be Cohen's bosom body. But at the end, you will even have these strange fantasies about alien civilizations. But at the end you will be lobotomized. And then, if you see the movie, then you realize that all these things happen. I mean, he is lobotomized at the end, because that's what when I went at the last shot, when they are so happy and kissing each other, it slowly fades to white, which for me would meant like, okay, there he goes. That's the end, the dream. They lobotomized him. And all the other things happen. He finds the alien civilization, he rescues the planet, he finds the good girl, he kills the bad guys. But that's a dream. Now, you can see it as a reality too. So.
Well, good. I think I speak for everybody saying we really enjoyed this. Come to interviews tonight, and here at 8 o'clock if you want to get into some more. Thanks.
I like totally. I got
Uncertainty.
Yeah. Let's go first. To the left.
If I make a move, I can try. Sure. Jeff?
Hi.
Please give everybody the opportunity to ask the questions they want to ask.
Great, thanks. We'll let everyone get set up and then we'll get ready to go.
So,
Okay. Well,
microphone's okay? Everything works here?
Well, Dr. Verhoeven has given us about a half hour, 45 minutes to ask whatever questions you may have, and present Paul Verhoeven.
Right. And if there are no questions, then we just make the photographs.
Hi. I wonder if you might comment on the new NC-17 rating, given that RoboCop has been threatened with an X and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, I think this has mostly to do with the sexual issue than with the violence one. I think. Thank you. for violence or movies that include violence like RoboCop and Total Recall, I don't think there will be much difference. I don't think that the NC-17 applies to that at all. I think when you make a violent movie, then you probably get an R, and if you make them too violent, you get an X again, or you're not rated, or whatever happens. As I understand, I'm not sure if the X rating is still there or not. That's a bit unclear to me. Anyhow, the NC-17 would be mostly applying to movies that contain sexual issues, like we have seen in the example of Henry and June. And I think it's an advantage because it makes it possible to do a little bit more, to be a bit more open and less hypocritical or less elliptical with sexual scenes than was before. And you can do so now and still get an honest or a kind of a acceptable rating like NC-17 is supposed to be. So you don't have immediately to face the problem of an X rating, and you know that X rating for a Hollywood movie is kind of impossible. What happens is, of course, with X rating, if your movie is X rated, you cannot advertise, you cannot be on television, and so a movie that is expensive and needs the advertisements, needs the spots on television for the promotion of the movie, that would be impossible with an X rating. And so I think now with the NC-17 you can still go a bit further than you could do before, but you don't get the X rating. So it's a step forward. But then again, I think the whole system is kind of nonsense anyhow. So, I mean, if it's a warning system, it's fine. It's good that people know what they want to see, and if they don't like nudity, then they shouldn't go to see it. If they don't like violence, then it's okay for them to know that it's a violent movie and they just shouldn't see it. Warning systems are fine as long as it doesn't lead to censorship. Now, censorship, I think, is something that should not be there, I feel. I don't think that anything should be censored in life by some people. And strangely enough, when we in the Dutch government abolished X rating and said you can do everything, you can show everything, then for 1-2 years, and this was in the 70s, beginning of the 70s or end of the 60s, then for a couple of years everybody was making pornographic movies for 1 or 2 years, and the audience wanted to see them, and it went, and then after 1.5 years it was dead. Nobody wanted to see it because everybody thought it was so goddamn boring. And so it killed itself. I mean, so I don't believe in censorship. I think people don't care. They might be interested for a couple of months or a year, and they say, oh, now I know what a pornographic movie is, I've seen it. And then I say, it's like yawing, it's kind of boring. So I don't believe in censorship. But for the moment, NC-17 is better than it was before.
Are you still working on Basic Instinct?
Yes, I do.
And what stage is that in?
Well, we just started the casting, in fact. We need to cast 2 very important female parts, and we haven't done that yet. We just started the casting 2 days ago. And I think in the next couple of weeks I'll probably see a couple of 100 actors and actresses for the different parts, and especially for the 2 main parts. I've described the female character in the movie. Her name is Catherine. And what we are looking for is a kind of I would say a young Catherine Deneuve or a young Kathleen Turner, something like that. And so we're trying to find that. And then there is another female part that is nearly as important as the first one, and that has to be a little bit different than Catherine. So these are the 2 most important parts to cast. And but we haven't found him yet. And we just started, in fact, yeah. And of course there's all these names that everybody knows, from Greta Scacchi to Michelle Pfeiffer and Kim Basinger. I mean, that or something new. It would be nice to find something new or something that's not well known yet. And so casting has started. We start to look locations in a couple of weeks, and supposed to be shooting will be at the end of March, and I think the film should be released at the end of 91 or perhaps the beginning of 92. So within 12, 13, 14 months, something.
What inspired you to do this movie?
Which one?
The basic instinct.
Oh. Well, first of all, I wanted to do something different. I wanted to move away from the action science fiction genre, because you get so typecast, isn't it? Everybody's thinks that the only thing you can do is science fiction action stuff. And I think I can do something different, and I did a lot of different things in Europe. But then in Los Angeles, after doing RoboCop, and then after RoboCop, all the scripts I got were kind of about robots and action and all that. And Total Recall was a little bit in the same line. And I did it because I did Total Recall because it was the best script that I could really find after reading 150, 200 other scripts. And I wanted to do something light and something normal, or without science fiction, without special effects, and I couldn't find it. And then Total Recall was the best thing I got in my hands. And then after half a year of looking, I said, okay, I don't want to do special effects, but in this case I like the script so much, so let's do it again. So now, after Total Recall, I really wanted to move away from science fiction action. And Basic Instinct is much more a Hitchcockian thriller. So it's much more about people in a kind of a tense situation where there is a couple of murders are committed, and there are 2 or 3 possible suspects. They're all women, in fact. And so the story is about Michael Douglas, who is the main character, of course, in the movie. Michael is cast, of course, who is a cop, a homicide cop, and he's investigated these murder stuff, and in the meantime he falls in love with a woman that could be the murderess. So that's the story a little bit.
You started out as a Dutch filmmaker, correct?
Yes.
The Dutch film industry gives filmmakers about 50% of the money to fund a film. One might think this is helpful because you don't have to go looking for funds, but you've conveyed negative feelings that say the otherwise. Why such hard feelings?
Well, I mean, I think it's the problem with a system like that it is it's a pre-censorship situation, as you understand. Let's make it a bit more clear. It's not the censorship is not after the movie is done. The censorship starts before the movie is done. So when you have to give your scripts to a committee, and they judge if they want to give you the money or not. And so a certain genre of scripts is not admitted for certain reasons, and these reasons are kind of film political, I would say. And in my case, it was the problem that they felt that the scripts that I was giving to them, that I wanted to be financed, they felt as being, they thought they were too, let's say, use the word decadent and immoral, and that they were portraying that society in the wrong way. And so it got very difficult to convince them to give me money, and every year it got more difficult. And so, what is bad about the system is that you start to censor yourself. You think, okay, I want to do this, but I won't get that through, so let's do this. And so it's really a bad situation as a creative person, that you start to change your scripts even to get them through this committee. And when I felt that I was close to starting to do that, then I thought it was better to get out and go to the United States. I mean, I think there's a lot of advantages in a subsidy system. This is one of the big disadvantages. If the people that are in the committee, and you're always talking about 2-3 people, that there's a committee of perhaps 10 people or something, but you know as well as I do that there are always 2 or 3 people who decide what's happening in the committee. That's always the strong people. Now, if these people dislike your work, you're in problems. And that's what happened to me. In 81 or 81, the president of the committee, of the Dutch committee, was given, the presidency was given to a film critic who hated my work. Since I started to do short movies in this was 62, I think, 62, when he was critic for a newspaper. It was a short film of 20 minutes. He started already to write extremely negative things about me. And throughout the years, he has done so. So when he became the president of the committee, it got very difficult. And instead of compromising, I felt it was better to change gears and move to the United States.
What do you think can be done about this situation in the future for other Dutch filmmakers?
Well, change the committee. He'll get out. I mean, I think this year or next year he'll be out and somebody else comes in, and hopefully that's a bit more fair person. This is an unfair situation, of course. And I mean, the strange thing, of course, was that the movies that I made in Holland were all very successful. So it was not that I was spending, I mean, we got the money from the government, but we always paid the money back, because that's how the system works. If your film is successful, the money that you the money that you make, with the money that you make from the grosses, you have to pay the government back with an additional 20% interest. So if your movie is successful, the government gets more, because the 20% is in fact higher than the normal rate. The government gets more money out of you than they have put into you. And that's what happened to all my movies. So in fact, they always got more money than they spent. And that's why I felt it was extremely unfair that they didn't consider that as an advantage, but that they judged it only on moral qualities and said, well, we won't give you any money unless you change moods. And so it will change at a certain moment. I mean, I feel that the situation in Holland, I mean, now, after so many years, when I came back with Total Recall this year, this was July, 2-3 months ago, I felt that the situation in Holland had really changed a lot of the. I mean, there was always a lot of problems with my work in Holland and a lot of controversy. But with Total Recall, they all seemed to. Something stops here, or not? No, it goes there. They really started to be very positive. So Total Recall somehow changed the perception of my work in Holland again. Made it's strange, but it happened. Especially when you consider that Total Recall is a pretty violent movie. It was still strange that there was a very positive reaction from all the reviewers. Much more. I mean, when I did a movie in 1980, which was called Spatters, it was one of the 4 last movies I did in Holland. It had the worst reviews, the most negative reviews as I can imagine, all over the country, in every paper, in every television, every radio program. It was really, I mean, it was the worst. And really, there was a perception that my work was perverted, decadent, and should not be subsidized anymore. This was generally in the papers. And now, this is 80, so 10 years later now, with Total Recall, there was a real change, that people suddenly thought, oh, it's not so bad, it's interesting, and whatever. So, I mean, it was, when I came there, it was like prophet coming back to his own country a little bit, or the lost son, or something like that. It was a very positive atmosphere. So, I think things are changing, but it took 10 years.
What similarities do you see in the films you made in Holland and those you made in America?
Similarities? Yeah, right, with similarities. Well, there are, I don't know really if there are so many similarities. I think my movies are mostly well thought out. And I spent a lot of time in pre-production to make the movies as compressed and as fast as possible. Of course, the themes of the movies that I did in Europe are so different from the themes that I did here that it's difficult even for a lot of people probably amazing after seeing the American movies to go back to the Dutch ones and look at them. It's kind of amazing that the same person did that. I think there is always some things that will stay personal, like some humor, feeling for humor, if it's normal humor or kind of black humor, and interest in people, but it's very difficult for the person himself who makes these movies to see the similarities, really. I mean, basically, I think there's a big difference between RoboCop Total Recall on one side and the American ones, and the Dutch ones on the other side. I see more dissimilarity in a way that I think all my European work was based on reality. I mean, Soldier of Orange was an autobiographical book. Katie Tipple was autobiographical. Turkish Delight was. Spetters was based on newspaper articles and all taken from magazines, all real things. Even The Forced Man, even although it looks like a fantasy, was for 80% an autobiographical novel. And so everything was based on reality. And when I went to the United States, RoboCop and Total Recall, of course, are based on non-reality. There is nothing real there. It's all fantasy. Nobody like RoboCop ever lived, and certainly the situation on saving the planet of Mars is fantasy. So I think there's a big difference in approach. It's like, I feel a little bit like when I went to the United States and started to do these movies for certain reasons, that I was going back to my childhood. It's something like I always liked special effect movies when I was a kid, when I was 10, 12 years old. And this movie, The War of the Worlds, produced by George Pell, was one of my favorite movies when I was 12 or something like that. And I even, when I was younger, I started to make a comic book based on that. So it was, I mean, I loved that stuff. But then I started to work in Europe as a film director myself. I went much more to a realistic approach. And it's like I forgot about comic books and science fiction and all these childhood dreams that I had when I was a kid. And strangely enough, when I came to the United States, that came back. It was offered to me, and I jumped at the occasion because probably I had repressed it for 12 years or 15 years. I mean, I've always been working with the same scriptwriter in Holland, Gerard Soteman. And he is an historian and an extremely realistic person. And he dislikes fantasy. He dislikes science fiction. He thinks it's all nonsense, and he doesn't want to deal with it. Now, if you work together with somebody like that, then what you do are the things that you have in common. You don't do the things that are different. So what was activated when I was working with him was my sense of reality and realism. And I think when I lost that connection with him, when I went to the United States and started to work with other people, other scriptwriters, then these other things came up. And I think at a certain moment, probably I'll switch back to reality. And I think hopefully when I can continue to work here and everything goes well, I'm sure that in the next 5 years, I'll be more into realism, back to realism than I'm now. I think even Basic Instinct is already a much more normal movie than Total Recall.
Are you returning to reality with your upcoming movie, Christ the Man? And can
Yes.
you tell us what role is West Star Institute playing in your research? Or
Right. Well, so that's to start with West Star, because that leads me to the first part of your question. I became aware of West Star about 4 years ago. I read in the Los Angeles Times an article about the West Star Institute, and I was intrigued. I always wanted to do a movie about Jesus. I don't know why. I mean, I was always intrigued by Jesus. I was always reading about him and then I realized that. But it was always so difficult because you're reading the Bible, you read all these things in the Gospels, and you never can figure out on your own what you think is true and authentic, or what is probably something that was invented by the early church or even the later church. I mean, the Gospels were written in the year, Mark was written in 65 or something, and probably the Gospel of John, which is the last one, around 90 or 100. So that's about 30 to to 80 years after the death of Jesus. So, I mean, a lot of things can change, isn't it, in 30 years, especially in 70 years. And so there is a lot of things that are in the Gospels that are probably more reflection, ideas of the early church than things that really happened to Jesus. But they projected these events into Jesus because Jesus was the hero, of course. And so when you want to do a picture about Jesus, I think it's essential to realize what probably happened, what things are authentic and not. And as you know, or not know, I don't know, the Westar Institute is preparing the Gospels in 4 colors, which means from red, pink, gray, and black. Red being highly authentic and black being non-authentic. That's what they Robert Funk, who is the head of the Westar Institute, set out to do. And he brought all his scholars together, now ready for 5 years or 6 years, that every half year come together. They take a part of the Gospels and they try to figure out if these things should be printed in red or pink or gray or black. And so I think the Gospel of Mark will be soon ready, I think, the first one, the Gospel of Mark, in 4 colors. So, I mean, nothing is decisive, and this is just colors, and it might be people might have different ideas in 50 years, and if they find another gospel, like they found the Gospel of Thomas, about 30, 40 years ago, they found this new gospel, isn't it? The gospel, the 5th gospel, the Gospel of Thomas was found in 45 or 50 or something like that. They might find a new gospel, and there might be new things in that gospel, and it might change everybody's ideas again. But for the moment, this is what a majority of American scholars think what is authentic and not. And I think a big part of the Markian gospel will be printed in black, meaning that about 60–70% of the gospel by these scholars is considered to be non-authentic. And what I wanted, that's what I wanted to know. I want to know, what do scholars think at this moment is authentic? And I want to make a movie that's based on the red and the pink and not on the gray and the black. Use these elements that are considered at this point as being authentic. That was why I went to the Westar Institute. That's why it's my interest for realism, in fact, isn't it? Because I want the picture about Jesus to be realistic. It should not be a fantasy like The Last Temptation. It should be as authentic as possible. But of course, nobody of our age, nobody nowadays has been there. It's all reconstruction. It's all historical stuff. But it should be trying to find the historical values and not the theological ones.
Does the reaction that The Last Temptation of Christ received worry you about how your film about Christ might be received by the public?
Yeah, but, sure, I'm sure there will be controversy. But it won't be based so much on, I mean, there won't be, I don't see any sexual issues really there. I mean, I strongly believe that in the last part of his life, and that's the one that we are using in the movie last 2–3 years, I don't think that Jesus was really highly interested in sex. I think he was interested in the kingdom of God, and he was a dramatic change of events he was expecting, I think. And they didn't happen, of course. Nothing happened. Oh, he died. But, I mean, there was no major event, nothing, no intervention of God or something. Israel didn't change, and the people didn't change, and the Romans stayed there. And so he was expecting something radical, but it didn't happen. But I think his attention was really to the nearby and approaching kingdom of God. And so if it's controversial, then it would not be because of sexual stuff. It could be controversial because people would see Jesus in a much more natural, Jewish, political environment than before. I mean, just to give you one example, what we're talking about. There is a very famous parable in the Gospels, which is that Jesus comparing the kingdom of God to leaven that's put in by a woman into bread. He says, his disciples ask, what is the kingdom of God like? And he says, it's like leaven, or small piece of leaven that was hidden by a woman in a piece of bread, and then the leaven spread out to the whole bread. Yeah, that's what. Now that seems to be something neutral, like, yeah, sure, that's an observation, isn't it? That's what leaven does, and that's why bread becomes bigger, isn't it? And but the seminar has pointed out that leaven, of course, in Judaic thinking, was extremely impure, not pure. A woman was anyhow secondary, and a woman hiding something would be triple negative. Yeah, it's negative because it's leaven, which is impure, in contrast to unleavened breads, which is the pure stuff. It's a woman doing it, and it's hiding. So we have three negative elements in a row, and so it's a culmination of negative description, in fact, or strange. And then Jesus says, but the kingdom of God is like that. So it's pointing out to a triple negative, and then saying this is the kingdom of God, which is, in a sense, and was for his Jewish audience, an extremely provocative way of talking, because he was not pointing at something wonderful. He was pointing out something impure by a woman who was anyhow secondary and kind of impure, and then with the verb hiding, which is also not a positive word, isn't it? So there were these things. This is an example of what the seminar is pointing out, is working on, is trying to figure out. And I think it's really a different vision if you say, oh yeah, that this is a metaphor for something that is small, like leaven, and it comes in bread and it goes to the whole bread. So it's like a small community becomes the whole world, isn't it? Or whatever metaphor you want to take out of that, like a metaphor of becoming bigger and becoming more important and spreading out, like the Christian community or the church will spread out over the whole world or whatever. I mean, you can look at. But that was not what he was saying. He was saying the kingdom of God, you should compare to something like this and then give a triple negative. So that's what we're talking about.
I was going to ask, do you enjoy making these types of visits to universities and speaking?
Yes. Well, I don't do it that often because it's difficult. As a filmmaker, 10 months of the year you are completely occupied by your job. In pre-production or shooting or post-production, it's pretty heavy work, and it's really only in between movies that you can do it. So it's just now that I stopped promoting Total Recall and I'm just starting up Basic Instinct, that it's possible to do that. So it's probably only during 1 or 2 months a year that I can do it. But I always like it. Yeah, I haven't done it here in the United States that many times. I did it in Holland. But also mostly probably once or twice a year at the maximum, because there's never time to do it. So I went to Greensboro and now I'm here. That's the only two things that I did in the United States, to the college, Greensboro College, and now here I'm at Ball State University. So that's, but I like it. I mean, it has been very pleasant till now, and I think it's instructive for me as it is probably, hopefully instructive for the other people, but it's nice to get some feeling what other parts of the United States are about, how the people look like, how they talk, what is their interest, and because I'm still learning, isn't it? I'm not from here, and California, Los Angeles is so different from the rest of the world, isn't it? It's like this luxurious kind of over-the-top community where you get a really there's not a feeling of Americana. It's something extravagant a little bit, yeah. And if you live only there, you might think that Los Angeles is United States, and it's certainly not, of course. I mean that you can easily see that some movies. I mean, that's where I can see, where you can, for me as a director, some movies do extremely well in Los Angeles and New York. But if you come to the middle section of the United States, people have no interest in that. So you have to realize that the United States is not New York and Los Angeles, isn't it? It's much more diversity than that. Also religious diversity.
We have time for one more question or two.
I wondered if you might comment on your reported differences with Joe Westerhouse and the Basic Instinct script.
Well, I think that, yeah, I felt that it was a real misunderstanding from the part of Esterhaus, but that's my interpretation. I think it was basically, we had only one conversation, which was about an hour. And Michael Douglas was there, and we raised some questions, and we had some, it was kind of antagonistic, but I didn't feel it as being something extremely, how do you say that, bad happening. We were raising questions that probably they didn't want to hear, but it didn't feel like something out of control. And I was, in fact, that's what happened. Then we left the meeting, saying, okay, let's think about all these, mostly about dramatic questions, also about sexuality and stuff. Let's think about it for a couple of weeks, and then we'll be back all together, and let's sit together again. And I was highly amazed, in fact, the next day to read in the papers that he went to the LA Times. So I felt like that it was an unnecessary step, and that in fact, that I'm revising the script now, and I think Esterhaus will be highly amazed to see that we are not changing his script at all. In fact, I think basically I felt was a big misunderstanding, and I think that when Esterhaus gets our revised script, because he didn't want to work on it anymore, and I'm working now with another writer, I think he would be extremely appreciative with what we did, because I really feel that Esterhaus wrote an excellent script, and that there is not that much to improve. It's a little bit interpretation, but even things that when I was talking to Esterhaus, let's put it differently, even things that I raised in my conversation with Esterhaus, and that he rejected or didn't want to listen to, I realized now that I've been working on the script for a couple of months that he was right. So I have no problem at all with the whole thing. But and it might be solved in a nice way when he reads the script or sees the movie and sees that we are... I mean, I'm always very honest with my writers. And I've been working with the same writer in Holland for 15 years. And I had the writers of Total Recall, both writers on the set in Mexico City all the time. I had the writer of RoboCop on the set all the time, and I'm always talking with the writers and trying to figure out how to do it, what to do, what to change, what not to change. And I'm not somebody who takes a script and says, okay, forget the writer, now I'm going to do my own stuff, yeah? I'm not like that at all. I have a great respect for writers, and especially, and certainly for Esterhaus, who is a really good writer. And I can see what the good work is there, and I wouldn't change that unless I would be feeling that something much better comes out of my brain, of my next writer's brain. But in Basic Instinct, I feel that's not the case.
Anyone have anything else? Quickly, have you made any major compromises in
In Total Recall, the only compromises that I had to make, especially on RoboCop, was with the MPA, with the censor or the rating system board, isn't it? And especially in RoboCop, we had to change scenes because otherwise we would have got an X rating. And of course, in my contract, it was, I mean, I had to deliver an R-rated movie. So I feel things that I did in RoboCop as a compromise. We had a little bit the same problem in Total Recall, but that was far less, I felt. The committee looking at Total Recall was much more appreciative on Total Recall. They liked it much more than RoboCop. They were pretty offended by RoboCop. And Total Recall, I don't know, because it was Arnold or whatever, they said that they liked the movie even, that they were pleased, but they felt that it was a little bit too strong. And please, could I soften or tone down a couple of scenes? And they said this scene, and that scene. And so we did, and then we presented and said, oh, it's fine. It was very easy. With RoboCop, I had to go back to the MPA 7 times before it was accepted as an R rating. It took on a couple of months, really, to get from an X to an R. So I really felt that things were lost there that I thought were better in the original. In Total Recall, I don't have that feeling, really.
Dr. Verhoeven, thanks very much.
Okay, my pleasure.
We have some information on the West Star Institute.
This has high gain on it. It's got the high gain.
Would you just use?
I did too.
Let's see. What do you shoot?
Let's get the crowd. Let me get the crowd.
He's trying delicate stuff to Jenny. She acted like
Right here. Not easily. That just picks up hot, fast motion.
Good evening. I'm Warren Vanderhill, Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs here at the University, and on behalf of the Provost Lecture Series and the University Film Committee, I want to extend a very warm welcome to all of you, and I just want to add as kind of a personal comment, it's really good to see so many of you here for this quite unique evening. We're privileged tonight, and I would say, in fact, intrigued, to have as Ball State's guest Dr. Paul Verhoeven, a recognized master of both intense realism and fantasy in filmmaking. This is the man who directed Total Recall, a formidable undertaking, but one that proved to be summer 1990's biggest hit, grossing over $117 million in the United States alone. You're probably also familiar with RoboCop, released in 1987, that brought Dr. Verhoeven worldwide acclaim. You'll soon be hearing much more about Basic Instinct, a detective thriller starring Michael Douglas that Verhoeven is presently guiding through the pre-production stages. Tonight, we'll be privileged to become acquainted with Paul Verhoeven himself. Born in Amsterdam, he grew interested in cinema during his 6 years at Holland's University of Leiden, where he earned a doctoral degree in mathematics and physics. I must say that his dissertation to academics like myself was on a most impressive subject, the mathematical basis of relativity. Other areas of study included classical Greek as well as painting, the latter appropriately pursued in Paris. After directing several short films, A Lizard Too Much, Let's Have a Party, and The Wrestler, Dr. Verhoeven served with the Royal Dutch Navy as a documentary filmmaker, a skill he put to use on his return to civilian life. Entering Dutch television, he first scored with such insightful documentaries as Musert, a profile of a notorious Dutch quisling who collaborated with the Nazis during the Second World War. Verhoeven's major break was a 1969 television hit, Floris, an adventure series about a medieval family. He segued then into motion pictures with Business is Business and received international notice when his film Turkish Delight won an Oscar nomination as the best foreign language film in 1973. Then came Kietje Tippel and Soldier of Orange, the latter a taut World War II drama about the Dutch underground that was nominated for a Golden Globe. Next was the film Spetters, a controversial look at Holland's teenagers, followed by the thriller The Fourth Man. This movie won a number of awards, including the Los Angeles Film Critics Award as Best Foreign Film and the Toronto Film Festival's International Press Award. Between these two features, he directed the television film All Things Pass. Making the leap to Hollywood, Verhoeven then directed RoboCop and Total Recall, which represent his ventures into science fiction and the futuristic Odyssey. Sometime in the next 2 years, Verhoeven will begin filming still another kind of movie, Christ the Man. Based mostly on the Gospel according to Mark, the film will emphasize Christ's political impact while also showing largely unknown aspects of his family life. For assistance with the script of this film, Dr. Verhoeven is consulting the West Star Institute, a Sonoma, California-based think tank specializing in biblical scholarship. Its flagship is the Jesus Seminar, a prestigious body of more than 100 internationally recognized scholars of diverse religious and denominational backgrounds who are in the 6th year of investigating the authenticity of event as an evening with Paul Verhoeven. I understand, among other things, he will take questions from the audience at the floor microphones and also answer some pre-submitted queries. In the process, I'm certain that you will learn much more about a multifaceted and multi-talented person. Please join me in welcoming to our campus Paul Verhoeven here at Ball State University.
To start with, the question from the famous box in the Student Center, an anonymous one. Why did you direct RoboCop 2?
Because I thought it was boring to do a sequel. That's basically all it is about. It's very difficult to make a sequel better than the first one, and I mean, if there's a concept of several sequels when you do the first one, like Star Wars had a concept of number 4, 5, and 6, I think you can make a good sequel, but if you just base the sequel on the fact that the first one was successful, I think it's pretty bad. And anyhow, I was just afraid that I would be bored when I would be shooting it. So I felt that it would be more interesting to do something completely, not completely different, but really different, like Total Recall, and that's why I didn't do it.
Anytime, by the way, you'd like to come down and ask a question, you see the mics down here to the left and to the right. So stroll down. We'll sort of alternate the pre-selected ones and ones that you may have from the audience. The next one's from Andrew Thomas. You here today, Mr. Thomas? Want to stand up? Want to talk? He's from Westville.
So what's his question?
Question is, what was the total budget or cost on Total Recall?
Well, we started out with a budget of $43 million. And then I went over budget, so it ended up with 58, I think. I mean, which is an enormous amount of money, especially when you realize that then we have to add about 20 million for publicity, like spots on television and other promotional items. And there's another $5 million for prints that you have to send to the theaters, of course. Then there's another probably $10 million for losing interest during the couple of years that the film is in production. So altogether, a film like that, the real cost are around $90 million, I would say. Yeah, it's amazing, but it still works, you know. And I mean, because if you, the film will make in the United States around $180 million or a little bit more, and around the world another 120, 130 million. So altogether, the grosses of the movie will be around $240, $50 million. And half of that, a little bit less than half, but say half of that will be coming back to the studio, which is around $110, $120 million. So basically, they make some small profits on the theatrical release here and overseas. And of course, that's not worth doing it, because that's too small of a profit. It is about $10, $20 million, which is an enormous risk on a movie of 90 million. But where they really make the profit nowadays is in the video sales and on the television. And that's basically why you can do a movie like that, because then there is an additional $40, $50 million coming back to the company immediately, let's say in 1 or 2 years, and then for the next 10 years there is every year like $5 or $10 million dipping in. So it's, although it seems to be an outrageous situation to make a movie for between 60 and ultimately for $90 million, from an economical point of view, it's still a healthy situation. If you want, if it's healthy from an artistic point of view, that's probably up to you to decide. But I mean, commercially, economically, it's okay. If the film works well, of course. If the film doesn't work, then it's a big. I mean, as you know, and one of the questions is about that. So we can skip the question because I'll answer it now. Somebody asked me how I felt about Ghost doing better than Total Recall, and the budget grosses, the grosses of Ghost are about, I probably will end up close to $190, $200 million, which is about 60 million more, 70 million more than Total Recall. And especially when you realize that the movie Ghost was made for probably half the price, say $25, $30 million, half the price of Total Recall, of course it seems, it's clear that a movie like Ghost, for the people that make it, still talking economically, is more interesting than Total Recall. On the other hand, nobody in Hollywood was realizing when Ghost was finished that it would do something like that. They released it in a kind of a limited amount of prints, which is an indication of the belief in the movie. They released it in about 700 or 800 prints. If you compare that to movies like Total Recall or others like 48 Hours too, which are released in 2,300 prints, That's where you see what the industry is really expecting what's going to happen. And then they found out that Ghost was doing extremely well, and they added prints and prints. But it's very difficult to foresee a success like Ghost, or Pretty Woman even. It's easier to foresee and to structure a film like Total Recall. And that's why you cannot count on Ghost, but probably you can count more on something like Total Recall, with I think a pretty good script, and a star, and hopefully a competent director. And that's why they still make these movies. And if the movie does well, like Die Hard 2 or like Total Recall, then it's a good investment. It's not a sensational investment that you get out of Ghost or Pretty Woman, but Pretty Woman and Ghost are really things that nobody could foresee.
When are you going to make a comedy?
Well, I've been trying to find a comedy in Los Angeles, but it's very, I mean, one of my favorite movies of the last couple of years was Fish Called Wanda. And these kind of scripts are really not very much available in the United States. I mean, and then, secondly, they wouldn't send it to me immediately. So I have typecast myself into the wrong direction doing these two movies, Total Recall and Robocop, because normally what I get on my table in my office are all kinds of movies like similar, like action, science fiction, adventure, and comedy. When they see a comedy, probably they would go to Danny DeVito or John Landis. So they wouldn't send that script to me. So I think to make a comedy, you have probably to develop your own material, which I'm trying to do. I'm setting up kind of a black comedy about two women that are married to men that are not pleasant, and they decide to get rid of them. So that's what I'm planning to do. If it will be made, because it's kind of a dangerous subject for Los Angeles, for Hollywood, it might be too dark for them, although it's a kind of a comedy. So I don't know really if it will be made. It will be ready probably in a couple of months. And then it's still to be seen if you get financing for a movie like that, that ultimately will be much less expensive than Total Recall, probably will be around, say, the maximum $20 million. But it's like Spielberg said when he wanted for years to do E.T., he said it's much more difficult to get money for a small movie than to get it for a big one.
What was
Right.
What was it like to direct a star like Arnold Schwarzenegger?
To work with him?
Yes.
Extremely pleasant. He's a very charming man, in fact, and he is very supporting to the director. So, for example, when I went over budget, and the studio heads of the studios then fly over, we were shooting in Mexico City, and they come over and they start to be mean to you, because they want you not to go over budget. I was already over budget probably $5–6 million by then, and that was halfway the production. So they were certainly foreseeing that there would be another 5, which of course is what happened, of course. And so they wanted to eliminate scenes. That's the first, if they don't fire the director, then the first thing they will do is try to cut the script and take pages out, they're expensive. And what happened is that Arnold, when they wanted me to do so, and I mean, my power is not the power of Arnold Schwarzenegger. I mean, that's not only physically, but it's also in a film political way, Arnold's wish will normally be fulfilled in Los Angeles. And Arnold wished that the pages would not be taken out of the script. In fact, he had such in his contract. And he used his influence, I mean, you could also say his power, to convince, if you want to use that euphemism, the studio that we should do the movie as it was written. So we really could shoot the movie as it was done by the scriptwriters. And I think if Arnold really likes the director and he feels that the movie is moving into a good direction, that it is a strong movie, he is extremely supportive, and then he's a nice fellow to have around. I'm always pretty neurotic when I'm doing a movie. Shooting a movie, I'm normal now. But in pre-production and post-production, I'm kind of normal, but when I'm shooting a movie, I get very tense because it's so difficult. And Arnold is a very easygoing, confident man. And when he gets to the set, it gets really very pleasant. So it was absolute fantastic to work with Arnold, and I would anytime do it again.
David Pleiss, Greencastle, Indiana. Which of your films do you like the least?
I think that would be probably a film I made just before Soldier Warrants was called Katie Tipple. And I felt that we never, this is a movie that was situated at the end of the 19th century in Holland and Brussels, and I felt that we were never able to solve the problems of the middle part of the movie. So dramatically it fell apart halfway. And I think it's an interesting movie with nice production design and nice parts. Rutger Hauer is doing one of the parts. But basically, it's the only movie that I would like to redo, because I felt that we never got to the level that we should have got to in the first place. And then I still feel that the first English-spoken movie I did in Europe, it was for an American company, and I did it just before Robocop. It's called Flesh and Blood, and it's a medieval movie. I thought at that point, I was still living in Europe, that this was a very American movie, because it had adventure and action and was kind of romantic. Of course, it was very cynic and downbeat, but I didn't realize that. So for the American audience, it didn't work at all. It worked okay in France or something like that, but it didn't work at all. And I have the feeling that that movie I would like to do another medieval movie and try to do Flesh and Blood in a kind of an American way. And in fact, we are just developing a project for Arnold Schwarzenegger, which is a movie that is situated in the Crusades. So it's a 12th century, 1115 or something like that. So that's the kind of a plan of me to improve on Flesh and Blood. So these are the two movies, Katie Tipple and Flesh and Blood, that I don't like.
Lynn Dempsey of Chicago asks, who's the best actor you've ever worked with?
Best actor would probably be Jerome Crabbe, who did the second part in Soldier Warrants and the first part in The Fourth Man. Most charismatic actor would undoubtedly be Rutger Hauer. And I
recall Robocop been released.
They have been.
Okay.
If they're not available here, that's a problem. But they should be in any music, whatever shop. You should be able to find the soundtracks. Really, they were both released.
How important is the story?
Very. Yeah, I spent a lot of time with the composer to go through all the different cues and find the most effective music. Now, of course, I'm not writing the music, but you can help the composer a lot by saying, okay, I want a rhythmic situation here, then I want to be changing the rhythm to a different mood. And, I mean, when you work very closely with the composer, I think you can really improve the score. So, I mean, for me, it's, especially with movies like Robocop and Total Recall, which is all action entertainment situation, I think a good score helps to make it more pleasant for the audience to look at the movie. So I think it's very important. And I like music. I mean, music is the only art that I really can enjoy without thinking about my own movies. I mean, I can listen to classical music or modern music or rock music, and I mean, I like just be able to like it because it's good music. When I look at, read a novel or look at films or whatever, I always have the feeling that I have to think if I can do something with it, which is kind of a professional thing, of course. But so with music, I don't have that. I think music is probably the most wonderful form of art that anyhow exists.
Here in an academic setting, we like to take your finished product and pretty well tear it to shreds thematically. And how much, when you approach a movie, how much does the the script itself affect the finished product, and how much does your own ideology come to the picture when you're developing the film?
Well, that depends, of course, in what state you get the script. A lot of the scripts I did in Europe, like for movies like Soldier Horns or Fourth Man, I worked very closely with the scriptwriter, feelings and his feeling of idealism. And that's why probably Alex is, in the eyes of Eric, is an okay guy. He's a friend who made the wrong decision, but still a friend. To do things in the theater in a way of spectacle that go far beyond what is possible on video, on television. Or you can be provocative on films. So that's another possibility to get people to the theater.
Okay, speaking of provocativeness, I read recently in Premiere Magazine where in one of your future movies you wanted to tackle the issue of total male nudity. Now, assuming that this is true, what makes you want to tackle something that is that touchy? And also...
because it's touchy.
Okay, well, how do you think the new NC-17 rule will also affect this?
Well, I think what I wanted to do, this was an article, an interview that I did by telephone with Premiere Magazine a couple of months ago, and it was not about the movie that I'm going to do now, but another movie that is not yet made, and where the script is not even finished. It was a movie based on a film, that it would be completely dishonest and kind of foolish to avoid the issues of contract that they still have to sign. It will say that it should at least be an NC-17 or an R rating. The studio will never spend $40 million, which it probably will be the cost of the movie, and risk the fact that this would be an X-rated movie. Because if it, you know, the problem is not the X-rating, the problem is with X-rating you cannot advertise. You cannot have any television spots, you cannot advertise in the papers, so nobody will know that your movie is there, and basically you would lose 39 of the 40 million. So no studio would ever do that. But if you make a movie like Women of Bukowski, which is made probably for $4 or $5 million, then you have all the freedom of the world to do whatever you want. If you make a movie of $40, $50, $60 million, your freedom is much more reduced. And that if you accept to do a movie like that, I think you have to know that you cannot do what you probably would have preferred to do.
Yes, sir. With your two past films, you've worked extensively in the science fiction, action, adventure genre. Noticeably, within the past couple of years, there's been a tendency within those, noticeably movies like Star Trek V and RoboCop 2, to lose total control by the film's ending into just kind of morass. I understand that there was a lot of problem with the third act of Total Recall. I was wondering if I could have your thoughts on that, and also just kind of as a subsidiary question, your general thoughts on the technical aspect of your directing and what you feel is important.
Right, well, I mean, that's true. I said that there were problems with the third act in all these 25 drafts, and we tried to solve the problem as much as we could. It's basically the problem of the film always was that you have a very interesting mental theme, that the man thinks that he is, that the man finds out that he has lost his identity, that he has, let's say, the wrong memory. And there are a lot of interesting flipping around things in the movie. The last good one in the original script is probably when this man, Esterhaus, his doctor, comes into the room and tells him that he's not there, that he's dreaming, and is trying to prove him that he is dreaming. And then, from there on, in all these drafts, what always happened is that for the last 40 minutes of the movie, it was just one long action stuff. And it was just Arnold trying to get to the nuclear reactor or whatever it was in all these drafts and pushing a button and making a lot of noise. And it was very difficult to solve that problem, because basically
it was difficult to find another mind flip to add to the third act, so that the third act would at least also have mind stuff. And what we added, what my scriptwriter Gary Goldman added, was the situation where in the third act you find out that the person that we thought was a good guy, which is Hauser, who gives him all these instructions, and who is his former personality, which you of course think is a nice guy, and is his say former personality is good, that we find out that his former personality is bad. And that's the last thing that we added as a mind flip. And so, and anyhow, after that, there was still another 15-20 minutes to go, which is then full action, of course, which you have to fill in as good as you can. Which is difficult, because if a film has a lot of good twists, then it's difficult to do without them for the last 15-20 minutes, and only that you can only base yourself on action or adventure or whatever. So that was basically what I would say was the problem, and we tried to solve that as good as possible. I mean, for me, of course, the film is anyhow has to do with two realities. One being the reality of him going as a secret agent to Mars and discovering that there is a problem and solving the problem, which is starting the nuclear reactor and helping the guerrillas and destroying Cohagen. The second level of the movie, of course, is that from the moment that he goes into the recall chair till the end, it's a dream. And I tried to make that second level work throughout the whole movie. That was basically what I wanted, that at the end there would be two possibilities, and it would be both true. For me, they're both true. There is not one or the other. It's or a dream, or it is reality. It is a dream, and it is a reality. And I think they're both there. That's why at the end of the movie, I slowly fade to white instead of black, which for me meant that that now is happening, what has been said before in the movie, has been prophesied by Dr. Edgemar, that he is lobotomized. So at the end of the movie, getting to white means or it's a happy ending, or he loses his brains, which is probably also a happy ending, but I don't know.
Okay, and also your technical thoughts on your directing style, at least.
Well, that's difficult because that would involve probably a couple of days to tell you. But with a movie like that, of course, like Total Recall and Robocop, it is, in fact, these movies are very technical, and so you have to prepare them very carefully. And every shot of a movie like that is storyboarded, and all these storyboards go to the different departments, and everybody studies them and comes up with their own solutions, come back to me. So basically, what you are, much more than as I say, than a free-doing painter, you're much more a general in the middle of a very complex logistic system. And of course, the problem is that you could lose any real creativity, because it's more logistic sometimes than filmmaking. And the challenge is always with these big movies to be aware of all the technical problems, but not to think that they are the most important. And I think that's basically what I tried to do in both movies, which was a little bit easier on Robocop because it was technically an easier movie than Total Recall. So, I mean, that's about techniques. I mean, for the rest, of course, there's a lot to say about techniques. But, I mean, what I felt a little bit that after doing these two movies, that I want to do something with actors again. I mean, not that it's not with actors, but there's so much emphasis on the other things than on the acting in Total Recall and Robocop that I felt I should go back to more normal situations where the actors are more important than the special effects or the action. So Basic Instinct at least will be a movie where the actors are important and the plot is important, but the action is really minor and there are no special effects.
How do you foresee the role of women in film, and also
do you think that there are more women getting into the technological aspects in directing? And also, do you think it's more hard for a woman to get into directing than a man, or is it just a matter of who has the most talent, drive, and the amount of luck involved?
Talk about acting or in the crew, in technical aspects?
Technical aspects in directing.
Right. Well, I mean, in the United States, it seems to be more difficult for women to get into filmmaking than in Europe, I think. Especially to become a film director. I think there's still a lot of disadvantages to be a woman. I mean, not in reality, of course, but in a sociological way, it's very difficult. It's more difficult, it's anyhow difficult to break into the film industry. And if you are a woman, then it's even more difficult. Because it's a man industry still. The people that make the decisions are for 90% men. And so there is anyhow always this kind of feeling that a man would do better than a woman, which is of course very inappropriate, but that's, I mean, that has, if you look at Christian religion, or Christian societies, or even Jewish societies, you can look at the societies now in the Middle East. I mean, of course, it's pretty clear that they think that women are pretty inferior anyhow. It's like, in the old days, they thought that women were even probably less important than cattle. But, so it's a long way to get to where we are now, but I'm very optimistic. I think it improves every year. And my operator, I had my operator on Total Recall was a woman. So the person that would do the camera work, I mean, not the lighting, because that was a man, that was Joshua Kane, but a woman, the operator, so the person that was doing all these things with the heavy camera, when everybody said, well, it's too heavy for you. She did all that, and she did a great job. And I think there are more and more people that are willing to accept that women are really equal. But it takes some time.